I now feel as though, and I don't think I felt this way even a month ago, but I kind of feel now, I get the sense now that Deshaun Warner, Dak Brinkley are guys that are going to be seeing the field maybe a bit more than even I anticipated. And I'm not saying they're going to be seeing the field like a lot, but I think it might end up being a little bit more than what I expected.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, alongside Kevin Flaherty, as always. We are here. We're going to be breaking down some more on KU football fall camp, and also some KU basketball news as well. As always, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy us, if you like hearing us talk, if you like watching us on YouTube, like, subscribe, 5-star rating and review, leave us your comments, share your thoughts. You can also share your thoughts with us on the Mint Mobile hotline at 913-407-6524. So there's infinite ways for you to get involved in the conversation on the show if you want to share your thoughts here with us via the comment section on YouTube, via ratings and reviews, or the text Mint Mobile text line as well at 913-407-6524. Kevin, how are we doing?
Doing well. It's we're getting into it with fall camp, right? Like we don't have that much fall camp left, and that season opener against Lindenwood is just getting closer and closer and closer.
Yep, we're just over 2 weeks away from kickoff for KU and Lindenwood at Children's Mercy Park, which should be a fun game. One quick thought I had on that, I was thinking of, sometimes those September games, when you think about the weather, the September games, especially at the booth and the way it's oriented, if you are in the whichever stand the sun is on and it's like 100 degrees and you're baking. Yeah. But I had this thought, Children's Mercy Park is fully enclosed and it's got like the extendo, I don't know, whatever, words.
Awning type stuff.
Awnings. Awnings. There you go. Yeah, that extend out. So I'm thinking maybe actually it could be a more pleasant experience possibly for fans at Children's Mercy Park in terms of maybe it might not feel so hot, even if it is a little warm. So, but obviously this first game is a night game. And wait, the UNLV game is a night game too, right? They're both at night. Yeah, so it's all good.
Right? Yeah, it's going to be all good. And, you may get sun in your eyes just for a little bit as, guys are finishing warming up and then early into the game, but not much. And it should make for some beautiful night game atmospheres for sure.
Yeah, I guess they're both at night, so really you shouldn't have to worry about the weather, hopefully, too much in terms of the heat, I guess, as long as there's no, rain or anything. But, okay, we're going to dive more into KU football and fall camp and some of the latest updates and our thoughts through fall camp to this point later on in the show. But there was some KU basketball news that happened over this weekend. It's been a pretty quiet offseason, actually, relatively speaking, an extremely quiet offseason for KU basketball up to this point. You think back to last year, with some of the transfers they got, Hunter Dickinson committed late, and then you had the trip to the Bahamas that they took, or where they played some games, and then that was in July of last year, and then the Arturo Morris stuff happened, and so on and so forth. So, relatively speaking, it's been a significantly more quiet offseason to this point for KU basketball. But they did make an addition to their roster. They added another transfer, and that is one David Coit. He is a transfer from Northern Illinois, and he will be joining Kansas for this upcoming 2024-25 season. He's a senior, so he'll be coming in with basically 1 year of eligibility left, coming in for Kansas. He is a 5'11" guard. And so when you look at kind of maybe any areas of weakness he had for KU basketball, the injury to Marco Jackson, I think, probably helped precipitate a move like this because it thinned out your guards a little bit more. Kansas obviously had added Shaquille Moore kind of late in the transfer portal cycle as well from Mississippi State to help shore up their guard play. But now you added another guy like David Coit, who is, like I said, 5'11" guard, but very explosive and really an elite scorer. That is this guy's calling card. He is a scorer. In 2 seasons at Northern Illinois, he averaged over 16 points per game both seasons. In this most recent season, he averaged almost 21 points per game. He started his career at Atlantic Cape Community College, which is in New Jersey, where he averaged 30 points per game. 30 points per game before going to Northern Illinois. Now, a couple things to take away here. Northern Illinois, in case you're wondering, they were bad last year as a team. They were bad. They went 11-20 overall. They got just 5 wins in conference play. But again, Coit was kind of the main engine of their scoring for them, averaging 21 points per game. His 3-point shooting, and this is always something I always like to pay attention to. His 3-point shooting was 38% in 2022-23 with Northern Illinois. It dropped to just under 34% this past season with Northern Illinois. But I think he's definitely a better shooter than that 34% number, because it really does seem like, if you watch the film on this guy, there wasn't really much offense coming from anywhere else. And there was a lot of situations where he was taking contested shots and really being forced into situations where it was kind of he had to put the ball up. So I think he's probably still in your mid to upper 30s, maybe 3-point shooter consistently, because this guy was shooting 9 3-point attempts per game this past season for Northern Illinois. So he was absolutely throwing up threes at a very, very high volume. And so he comes into Kansas as this is kind of where I was leading this conversation, Kevin, is where you expect him to fit in, because you look at the guard room for Kansas, you've got DeJuan Harris, you've got Zeke Mayo, you've got Shaquille Moore now also. Where does Coit fit in? Is he just a nice guy coming off the bench as sort of an elite spark? What's kind of your thoughts on maybe where he fits into this roster?
Yeah, when Kansas got Riley Kugel, one of the things that we kind of talked about with him was that he was a quote-unquote defense-independent scorer, right? You could defend really well for almost the entirety of the shot clock, and guy could hit a step-back shot, a really difficult shot. The defense could be perfect, and he just goes and makes a shot anyway. And while they play different spots, Kugel was more of a wing. Obviously, he's no longer heading to KU. Coit brings some of that same stuff, Nick, in terms of being a really tough shot maker. A guy, you brought up his percentages like Kugel. One of the things we talked about with Kugel was you couldn't really take his percentages as a shooter and just say, this is what he is. And the reason why was they weren't Nick Timberlake shots. And I'm not trying to insult Nick Timberlake. What I'm saying is that a lot of Nick Timberlake shots were clean, in rhythm. Ball touches the paint, it comes out, he takes a shot. No, David Coit was having to cross over 2 people, shoot off balance, whatever, and still shot the percentage that he did. I'm glad you brought up the point about him being, a better shooter than kind of the percentage indicates. When you look at the free throw percentage, which I think is a lot of times an indicator of just how good a shooter a guy is, he was at almost 88%, I think for his Northern Illinois career. Made 175 3-pointers over 2 seasons. But when you look at how important, and I'm not saying he's going to play this big of a role, but you look at how important Remy Martin was for the run in 2022, the main thing that he brought was just sort of that ability to score even when the defense was there. He could just get his own shot, and he could make that shot. And while I think Coit faces a significantly his path to playing time is much more uphill, obviously, than Remy Martin's is, because of the other guys there. And Shaq Moore, the things you hear about him are really positive in terms of being sort of that second point guard. Zeke Mayo, a lot of people talk about how he's, started to come on as well. There's not necessarily a straight line to playing time there, but at the same time, we've seen guys like this, whether through injuries or whatever else, that they're needed at some point during the season. Maybe it's the dog days of conference play. Maybe you're in a Sweet 16 game and the ball's just not going into the basket, and, Bill Self looks your way and says, we got to get a spark. But when you look at what he can add, like you said, he's explosive. He can get to the rim. He didn't run a ton of isolation at Northern Illinois, but he was very efficient when he did. Good pick and roll ball handler type guy as well. He's just sort of an instant offense guy off that bench. And quite frankly, a lot of times we see those guys playing bigger roles than you think, just because there's a point in the season somewhere where you just got to get buckets and you got to have guys that can get them.
Yeah, look, you look back at the past couple of years for Kansas, and the issue has been truly if your starting five aren't scoring and you turn to the bench and you look and say, oh gosh, is Jamar McDowell going to give us that spark? He's somebody off that bench going to give us that spark? And it just hasn't really been there, that bench player that can sort of energize and make some shots when your starters aren't scoring, right? I mean, Bill Self talked constantly about having the best starting five in the country last season for KU when Kevin McCullough was fully healthy. And while that may have been true, those guys over time in the regular season wore down, dealt with injuries, and became less effective because of that, I think. So you really need to have a rotation that's a little bit deeper. I know Bill Self likes to keep the rotation short, but you need to have guys that can score off the bench. And I think Coit does sort of fit that model. He's also a very durable player. This is a guy that played 59 games in 58 games, in 2 seasons for Northern Illinois. He started in 55 of them and played, basically, he averaged 37 minutes per game this past season for Northern Illinois. So he is a very durable player that's played a ton of minutes. And when you look at, a lot of times with guys like this, I also like to try to pay attention to what they did against upper-level competition. Obviously, the MAC, in terms of basketball, I don't think is necessarily the highest level. When you look at this past season for Northern Illinois, against Marquette, he scored 14 points. Coit did. He had a huge game against DePaul, which DePaul ended up being not a great team, but he scored a season-high 34 points, or one less point than the season-high, 34 points against DePaul. Scored 12 points against Northwestern when they played. He played against Iowa and scored 23 points. So he's had some pretty strong results, even against some upper-level competition. So I know there's a lot of KU fans that are probably going to be very nervous about the fact that, gosh, we brought up this sort of lower-level transfer in Nick Timberlake last season, and it was sort of a dud. What's it going to be like bringing another guy up? I don't know. I mean, the MAC, I think, is higher than the CAA, but the point still stands. But we'll see what the transition is like for him. And yeah, I think this is a player that is certainly going to be a guy that's going to be coming off of your bench, probably as your 8th, 9th guy. But again, he could be. I like that you brought Remy Martin, and I think you also did a good job caveating this of not to say that David Coit will be Remy Martin, but maybe have a Remy Martin-esque game where he comes in and scores a bunch of points at some point during the season. I honestly think that could be possible for him, for a player like this. The one final thought though on that I do have is just the fact that I'm curious to see how a player like this reacts at Kansas, because I just mentioned it. He played 37 minutes per game at Illinois, so he had the unlimited green light. He could do anything he wanted. At Kansas, his opportunities are going to be much more limited, and the question becomes, will he be able to take advantage of those opportunities when given to him and execute the way that I think Bill Self and this Kansas staff hopes that he can. So I'm excited about this. I think it's a good addition. The other aspect of this that I wanted to bring up is with the NCAA's recent or the court rulings, whatever, about the expansion of scholarship numbers for different sports. Basketball is going to expand, and so all of a sudden now this IARP crap that KU's still been dealing with in terms of trying to take away scholarships, that becomes a lot easier, because it sounds like they're going to have an opportunity to basically have up to 15 scholarships in the future. So now, who cares? Bring in as many guys as you can, go all in. Now, I think we talked about this earlier in the offseason, but you look at this Kansas roster, DeJuan Harris's last season, Hunter Dickinson's last season, KJ Adams is an upperclassman now. This is kind of the year that Kansas needs to go all in on, I think, right now, to try to win a national title. And it certainly seems like they're doing that. And I think this edition is further proof of that, because this is a player that is probably not going to, do anything with your floor if you're KU, but if he has any tiny chance of possibly elevating your ceiling just a little bit that could push you over the top, you go for it. And I think that's exactly what KU did in this situation.
Yeah, I like bringing up 2022 as well, because of the fact that in that season you had DeJuan Harris and you had Remy Martin, both of whom were point guard types. Remy Martin gets hurt, and the reason Kansas, at least part of the reason Kansas won the conference that year, was they had Yesufu there. And it wasn't that Yesufu was fantastic or otherworldly or whatever, but they had that depth there where he was able to step in and provide a little something. Coit is going to be a really interesting guy to watch. And I really liked your point about he's going to be going to a totally different role. This is a guy who took 77 3-pointers over Northern Illinois' last 6 games, almost 13 3-pointers a game. I don't know that anybody is going to get 13 shots a game at Kansas this year.
There were plenty of games where KU didn't even shoot 13 3-pointers as a team.
Yeah, and he was taking almost 13 threes a game there at the end. One of the things I also like, too, that I think helps his game quite a bit as a 5'11" guard was he made 17 threes last year, Nick, beyond 25 feet. And so when you look at that, defenses have to take notice of that. They have to spread things out. It changes the way you have to defend it, and that can open things up for other guys. And I think while, again, we're not necessarily expecting, Coit to come in and start, might not even play, 15 minutes a game, it'll be interesting to see how that rotation all shakes out. He is somebody that can come in and add sort of a turbocharged boost to your offense. And coming off a year where Kansas really lacked depth, but also lacked the ability to space the floor for a lot of the season, this is a guy that kind of gets you both, a chance to both space the floor and be a guy that can come off the bench and do it for you.
Yeah, that is one other point that I'm glad you brought up that I wanted to underline here is, this is a guy that has pretty much unlimited range.
Yep.
He can shoot from way deep, which is, again, something that KU has lacked as well in previous years. So that's kind of one other final note to put a bow on that conversation with Coit. So David Coit, Northern Illinois transfer, comes in and joins Kansas, added to their roster. He'll be here for the 2024 season coming up for KU. KU expected to be, I would think, a preseason top 5 team in the country. But obviously with the Big 12 conference schedule expanding to 20 games, it is going to be a gauntlet, especially when you consider the fact that you've added in schools like Arizona to this conference also. So we'll see how things shake out for KU basketball later on this fall and this winter. But obviously KU football is around the corner, and we're going to be diving more into that. Some more updates from fall camp, as well as Kansas is just over 2 weeks away from the kickoff of the 2024 season against Lindenwood at Children's University Park. We're going to get to that coming up on the other side. But first, as always, going to tell you about our friends at Home Field Apparel. The exclusive football boxes are on sale now, and KU is one of the 55 schools that has one. They've got you covered for the whole season. Home Field Apparel does with the football boxes. You get yourself a T-shirt for the summer games or for the warm games. You get a long sleeve for when it gets cooler, and then the hoodie for those November games at Arrowhead Stadium. Look, I've been to some Chiefs games at Arrowhead Stadium when it's November, December. If you're in the upper deck, you are getting buffeted by wind. You need something to keep you warm. Home Field Apparel has you covered with exclusive KU gear, the football boxes, and you can also just shop Home Field Apparel regularly for KU gear and gear from 130 other schools as well. And of course, use the promo code PAYHEED24 at checkout for your first order to get 15% off. KU football talk coming up here on the Payheed Podcast.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
You know when you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you bump on repeat and you have to share it with your friends so they can experience just how awesome it is? That's kind of what it feels like when you discover Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's such an awesome deal, there's no way you can keep it to yourself. Friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/payheed. That's mintmobile.com/payheed. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/payheed. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. And I just had a good conversation there talking about David Coit, the new addition for KU basketball. If you liked what you heard or saw, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop a comment. You can also hit us on the KCSN hotline powered by Mint Mobile to share your thoughts. 913-407-6524 is the number to text. Look, people, there's nothing easier than sending a text. I know you've got your phone right next to you. Everyone has their phone within arm's reach at all times nowadays. Grab your phone, 913-407-6524. Send us a quick thought, quick note on what you're thinking about David Coit being added to the team, what you think about KU football, questions, concerns, anything. 913-407-6524. Hit us up, and we will talk about it here on the show. Okay, so last week or a couple weeks ago, we talked about KU football. We're shifting into football now. With KU football being ranked in the coaches poll. Well, earlier this week, the AP poll came out, and Kansas is number 22 in the AP poll. So a very significant there for KU getting ranked for the first time in the preseason since 2009, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
For KU. So I know, Kevin, you asked Lance Leipold about it earlier this week when that was first announced, and Lance Leipold, I think, gave the regular answer, which is, it's just a number. It doesn't mean anything. But it's not insignificant that KU enters this season ranked. You've got some national recognition of what is being built here with Lance Leipold. And, yeah, I just think it's not something that can just be poo-pooed away that this team is ranked, considering where they were over the last decade and over the last couple of years before Lance Leipold arrived in Lawrence.
Yeah, and I think that was the second part of Leipold's answer was basically, hey, this isn't going to help us win a single football game this year, having that number next to our name. But when you look at it too, especially for this year's team, right? Because you've got 30 seniors, a lot of whom were on roster when Leipold first got here, when they struggled, before they made their first bowl trip, much less last year's 9-win season that kind of motivated media members to rank them this year. Having that to be able to show your players, to show them as sort of a tangible example of their process, of their progress, we've talked on here about how Leipold talked about how he wanted to get, the facility stuff, a lot of that up and running for the current group of players, right? Because they had a major hand in creating that success. I think, Nick, yes, it's something that ultimately doesn't matter, but at the same time, it's another thing to kind of show those guys, hey, your hard work is being rewarded. People see what you're doing. And quite frankly, we talked about it when the first ranking came out. It's great that they have that ranking, but talking to the players and stuff like that, they have bigger goals. And for them to achieve their goals this year, they're going to need to be better than the number 22 team, in the country. They're going to need to be a team that reaches the Big 12 title game, which means that you're probably a top 15 team. If you want to go to the college football playoff, you're probably going to need to be a top 10 to top 15 type team and win that Big 12 title game. And so number 22, it's great recognition for them to start off the season ranked. Shows people have a lot of confidence in where the program's at, where it's going. But at the same time, Kansas is going to need to be better than number 22 to kind of get to where they want to go.
Yeah, when you look at around the rest of the Big 12, a lot of teams kind of jumbled around that low teens, high 20s ranking, or high teens, low 20s ranking, I guess, with Utah being number 12 being the highest ranked team. But you got K-State, Oklahoma State, KU, obviously, all kind of right in that range as well. So it's going to be very competitive, like we talked about it. It's going to be, I know the schedule for KU may look favorable on paper, I think, but it's going to be a tough season, no question about it. And hopefully Kansas can rise up to that occasion and achieve those goals, right? I think it would be incredible to see the Jayhawks in Arlington when we get to December. So that's certainly the goal. In terms of fall camp, as Kansas continues to progress through and get closer to kickoff against Lindenwood, one thing that we hadn't really talked too much about since the start of fall camp, that's the defensive line and the defensive ends. You go back to like April or May, and the defensive line, defensive ends was by far away my biggest concern coming into the season for KU. Austin Booker declares for the draft, and it is a sort of a oh crap moment because there's not another Austin Booker on this roster. I didn't think at the time. And I think there was a lot of concern at that moment about what Kansas was going to do with pass rush, because we talked about Jeremy Robinson being sort of that stalwart guy, but is he sort of that real X-factor type player? Kansas had Dylan Woodkey, who is, again, probably more of a run-stopper type defensive end from Youngstown State. Then they go out and get By Joe, who I think is an excellent player, but what will his impact be this season? We haven't really heard too much about that. We actually had a chance to speak with quite a bit of the guys on the defensive line, along with Jim Panagos and Taiwo Natolu as well, about the D-line. Where is your level of confidence with the defensive line right now, and especially with the pass rush, as KU is now 2 weeks away, a little over 2 weeks away from the start of this season?
Yeah, I think, there's still some concern, right? Because you're relying on guys that haven't done it in a Kansas uniform, or at least not to the extent that you would have liked to have seen. Having said that, the buzz around Dean Miller is incredibly positive. They talked about the fact that from a GPS standpoint, and in our talk with Dean Miller yesterday, he specified, one, he's running in the 21s in the miles per hour, which is like a skill position type time, and he's a defensive end. But they also track for how quickly you get off the ball. They track for sudden deceleration, so changes in direction, and he's at or near the top of the group in those as well. So that's been a really positive development. Dylan Woodkey's played a lot of football, and that was something that they brought up. I think you're right in that, he's a guy that is going to win a spot in this rotation. I'm not sure that on 3rd and 8, he's the guy that you're like, hey, the opposing quarterbacks are going to fear this guy, at least not at this point. One of the other interesting things, though, Nick, is whenever you have young players in your program or first-year guys, because we'll go ahead and include By Joe in that as well, being a redshirt freshman, although he had his first year at Michigan State, you want to hear how people talk about them mentally, right? Because physically, you kind of know if they have it or don't at this point. And I don't think anybody doubted By Joe's physical ability, doubted the physical ability of Deshaun Warner after, he was in the All-American game and was a top 60 recruit in the country, or doubted Dak Brinkley, being a 4-star guy as well. One of the most positive things I thought, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, was listening to Lance Leipold and Taiwo Natolu talking about those guys. They brought up the mental stuff as much as the physical stuff. Hey, DJ Warner is even-keeled. He's a guy that, is very sharp. Dak Brinkley is a guy that's preparing really well. And I thought that those were really positive things to hear. And then the other part was Lance Leipold says there's a pretty high possibility that one or multiple of those guys winds up playing a role this year. And I think, when you look at the talent in that group, that's a positive development as well.
Yeah, the phrasing that Lance Leipold used, I thought was very interesting. Now, obviously, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not saying that I am, but some of the phrasing that he said, that he used when describing some of those players was very interesting, because I don't think he wanted to come out and outright say that, hey, they're going to get significant playing time. But I think if you kind of read the tea leaves and read in between the lines on what he said, I now feel as though, and I don't think I felt this way even a month ago, but I kind of feel now, I get the sense now that Deshaun Warner, Dak Brinkley are guys that are going to be seeing the field maybe a bit more than even I anticipated. And I'm not saying they're going to be seeing the field like a lot, but I think it might end up being a little bit more than what I expected. And you mentioned the physicality stuff. Man, Dak Brinkley is incredibly built. He's remarkable, and a really, really great interview as well. I had a chance to talk to him, and he's somebody that I am now fully bought in on as being a guy that can have an impact for Kansas this season, just based off the physicality of him and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel differently now than I did a month or 6 weeks ago about the freshmen, or before the start of fall camp, really, about how much those guys are going to play. I think it's going to be a little bit more. Again, I don't think it's going to be a lot, but if it's a 3rd and 8, I would not be surprised if they get those guys on the field because they've got incredible speed. When you talk about a guy like Deshaun Warner, and they're just Brian Borland, I thought was really the guy that kind of got me thinking about this more when he said, "Hey, it doesn't matter what year they are, we're going to put the best guys on the field, right?" And I think at some point this season, you're going to see if it's a 3rd and 10, the best guy to be on the field in those situations might be a Deshaun Warner, might be a Dak Brinkley. And that can only be great experience for those guys. And I think it's really, really exciting. And again, I don't know that those guys are going to be, consistent players or be guys that are going to be consistent X factor type players like an Austin Booker was, but maybe instead of just it being one guy, which was Austin Booker last year, maybe it's 3 or 4 different guys that you can rely upon that can make a play here or there in a game. When you couple in Jamie Robinson, when you couple in Dean Miller, Dean Miller is such an interesting case study on just the fact that he's got this incredibly high motor. He goes at 120 miles an hour, it seems like, in everything he does. And KU has been desperately trying to get him to maintain some weight on his frame. He's a very tall player, but he's lean, and KU's been trying to get him to add more weight while maintaining that speed. And it seems like maybe they figured something out with that. But they're talking to him. I mean, they were saying that he could burn, so many calories per practice that he just had to eat so much. So it's an interesting story with Dean Miller, and I'm curious to see what his impact will be. But yeah, with Dak Brinkley and Deshaun Warner, I am now leaning more towards, okay, wait a minute. These dudes are going to have a chance to play a little bit more this year than maybe I initially thought.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny because I asked Lance Leipold about, kind of tried to couch it a little bit in terms of saying, hey, at what point do you start to decide, whether a guy can be potentially a rotational piece or have a specific role? And Leipold kind of saw right through it and said, pretty sure I know what you're getting at here, and then went on to talk about the freshman. Got a lot of excitement about those guys, and I'm glad you talked about Dean Miller because he said he loses between 5 and 9 pounds of sweat at the average practice, and so trying to maintain weight with that, especially when you're not naturally a bigger guy. Dean Miller told me, I asked him, I said, what were you at graduating high school? He said, I was in the 180s as, a defensive line guy.
And so, for reference, he's like 6'6". So
he's like 6. Yeah, I think he's 6'5". Yeah. And so, yeah, he said he was in the 180s. I said, I hate to phrase it this way. I said, but is that sort of why you wound up at JUCO? And he's like, well, yeah. He goes, there was also the COVID thing and everything else, but he was like, obviously guys want bigger players at defensive end than weighing in the 180s. And, when he came to KU, he was a guy that was significantly smaller than what you would like on the edge. And he's at 235 now. He talked about in the spring, he was eating 5,000 calories a day. He said now he doesn't even count his calories. He just kind of eats until he can't eat anymore. And it was funny. I don't know if you're a Lord of the Rings guy or not.
Oh, big time.
All right. But hearing him talk about all his meals kind of reminded me of the Hobbits being like, well, what about like Second Supper, elevensies? He was listing off all of the different meals that he had to eat, all the snacking he had to do between all of those things. Sounded like he had 4 major meals a day as opposed to the 3 that most of us feel like we're supposed to get. And in between all of that, Nick, he's snacking. So it's kind of like, he would have a big lunch, he said, and then Katie, the nutritional director or whatever at KU, she's giving him 1,000-calorie peanut butter protein shake to have right after he eats his full lunch. So, it's amazing kind of what they were able to do. And I feel like when we think about nutrition and football players, a lot of times we think about it the other way, right? We think about a defensive tackle who comes in at 3:30 and has to basically eat, chicken and rice to get down to what he needs to be. for these guys that aren't naturally these sizes, I think we've talked about Blake Harrell in the past, being a high school tight end who is now, in the 290s. When you look at Dean Miller, the guy that the second he stops playing football, he may go back to being, in the 180s or 190s again. When you talk about guys like that, nutrition is just as important the other way, if not even more so, because you're trying to get them to add all this weight, but you're also not trying to have them do it by eating Snickers bars all day, right? You're trying to have them add good weight, and so there's a challenge in that, and there needs to be alignment between Gildersleeve, between nutrition and the player, and the player knowing that, hey, in order for me to get to where I need to be, it's not just in the weight room, it's also the nutritional side of things.
Yeah, overall, I would say my concern level has dropped. I wouldn't say it's gone away entirely in terms of this D-line and especially rushing the passer. I think my concern level has dropped, but really more so, my curiosity level has peaked. I'm really just more curious to see which guys play, who's getting out there in certain situations, and how impactful they can be. So I think I still have some concern there a little bit about those, making plays in critical moments in a game. But my concern has really kind of shifted over to more just curiosity. I'm really just excited to see what kind of combinations of players get on the field, who's able to get out there in critical situations and make plays. And so, I don't know. I'm more curious than I am concerned right now.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't think it's going to be solved by Lindenwood. I really don't. I think it's something where the coaches are going to go in with a level of curiosity, like, hey, let's throw this guy out there when the lights are on it and kind of see what happens. And so I think, ideally it works itself out fairly quickly. I think if you were to draw like a line in the sand and say, figure this out by now, it might be by the West Virginia game, maybe the start of conference play where you're kind of starting to see that. But remember, like Austin Booker, not that he didn't play well in the first game, but you kind of really started to see like, okay, this is a dude in that Illinois game, the second game. And so I'll be interested to see that trip against Illinois. We're going to talk about UNLV, here in a couple days when we do our rewind series. And I think with Kansas playing UNLV this year, we'll probably talk a little bit about the bowl game, but really about what Kansas is going to face, with UNLV this year, with all the interesting things that UNLV does in terms of misdirection, getting you kind of leaning left and then giving the ball to a speedy guy going right. That's going to be a really fascinating one too, right? Because if you're getting these young guys on the field, what are they doing in a situation like that where things are not necessarily straightforward and you need to make a quick decision, but make the right decision in order to make the play?
Yeah, and also quick shout out to Austin Booker, who got to a preseason game for the Chicago Bears. And I think Austin Booker has a chance to be a very, very good NFL player. And I think if you're a Chicago Bears fan, you should be very thrilled about that level of player that you got sort of later in the draft. So shout out to Austin Booker as well. A couple other notes here I wanted to make on fall camp. For anybody curious about Jalen Daniels' watch, I can assure you, Jalen Daniels is still fine. He's going through camp, full participant and everything, no setbacks. And I'll just say this. The less you hear about Jalen Daniels in fall camp, the better.
Yes.
Because that means that he is locked in. He's 100%. He's doing all the right stuff. The less you hear about him leading up to the start of the season, the better. So Jalen Daniels is fine. If anyone's curious, if you're on Jalen Daniels' watch, he's good. And the less you hear about him, the better.
We've talked about this, but he plays with so much torque, Nick. Like you see like some of the clips that get posted, and obviously the little bits of practice that we get to see on kind of a daily basis. This is a guy that when he throws the ball, he's almost like spinning around like a cartoon, and launching the ball. And so the fact that there aren't setbacks, the fact that he's being able to be Jalen Daniels out there and everything, I think is just such a positive indicator that, because like I said, like you watch some of those clips, look at the pass that he made I believe to Trevor Cardell, right? The other day that the KU football account posted.
Oh,
yeah. He really, he got his body into that one and kind of ramped up the velocity. And so the fact that he's been healthy, there haven't been setbacks, like you said, no news as far as this goes is good news.
Yeah, 100%. Beyond that, I just want to say this. I am fully bought in on Harry Stewart, by the way. Fully bought in. Fantastic kid. I had a chance to speak with him as well. I think he's going to be a very good player for Kansas, and I think he's another guy that may end up playing this season more than you would expect, right? You look around that running back room and you think Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw, Savion Morrison, even someone like a Torrey Loughlin, Johnny Thompson. How is Harry Stewart going to get playing time? I'm telling you, I think he's going to get a little bit more. So the one thing to keep an eye on, and we'll have to track this throughout the season, is a lot of these true freshmen, remember, you can play in 4 games and still redshirt.
Yep.
So I would not be surprised, especially in games where maybe Kansas get this as built up a lead or maybe later in the season, whatever, if you get to see some of these guys play like a game or two where they play a lot, just because of the fact that they can play 4 games and still redshirt. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, especially with a player like Harry Stewart. I think that's something that maybe could be in the cards for him as a guy who Kansas uses strategically in a couple games this season, and they get him on the field a little bit, but they still are able to maintain his red shirt. So he's a guy that I'll keep an eye on. But I'm telling you, he is a player for the future that I am very thrilled about. Obviously, losing Devin Neal will be tough, as you're going to lose Daniel Highshaw eventually. You're going to lose Savion Morrison. But I very much like where KU was at with Harry Stewart and also with Johnny Thompson as well to continue to spearhead that running back room going into the future.
Yeah, Dylan McDuffie got 45 carries last year, and that may not sound like a lot, but if you look at Savion Morrison, you look at Harry Stewart, it would not surprise me at all to see those guys kind of eat out of that bowl and also, maybe get a few more carries than that, depending on if they're able to pull away in a game or two and kind of keep, Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw a little bit more fresh. So yeah, I'm right there with you. He's looked great. It's funny, you thought from the recruiting rankings of this class, obviously, that, hey, this is the highest ranked class that KU's had in the recruiting database era, that it would be an impressive class. But with them getting on the field, getting to see them going against guys who are older than they are, everything else, I think they have met or exceeded expectations in terms of looking around and saying, I think this guy's going to be a player. I think this guy's going to be a player. I think, and obviously I think we thought that about, guys like DJ Warner and Dak Brinkley, et cetera. We've heard praise for Austin Alexander, for Jalen Todd. Harry Stewart, like you said, has looked really good. Isaiah Marshall has gotten a lot of kudos. Carson Brune has gotten praise. They've got a pretty good looking group of offensive linemen, in that group. And really, when you start going, guy by guy almost down the class, just about everybody is showing something at this point. We were like, oh, okay, that's kind of what you want to see from these freshmen at this point. John Kamara looks fantastic.
Yeah, that's true. He's the guy that we haven't talked about too much, but yeah, he's another player, sort of that linebacker. I mean, I think there's a possibility John Kamara is your future Hawk, or your future Craig Young type player, potentially for KU. So yeah, lots to be excited about with the young guys, lots to be excited about with the veteran guys. You mentioned it, they've got 30 seniors on the roster, so you've got the experience, you've got the veteran leadership that can hopefully lead you to a successful season this year if you're KU, and you've got the young talent also that can potentially make it happen, as well as Kansas, again, looks to the Big 12 title game, and it's entirely on the table at this point, and we're just over 2 weeks away from the start of that run, hopefully, for KU. That's going to do it for this edition of the Pay Heat Podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating and review, share your comments. Also, you can hit us up on the Mint Mobile text line at 913-407-6524. Send us a text. Share your thoughts. How excited are you? What's your level of confidence? What's your level of hype for KU football as we get ready for the start of the 2024 season and more? Until next time, for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.